there's another angle of this, Andrew, which is just so absurd, which is that, people will say that, Erica, she's been doing this or she's been doing that, and I would be doing something different. And it's like, first of all, that's fine. Like, if you want to criticize somebody because you have a disagreement, disagree with my politics, disagree with something that Erica or Andrew say on the Turning Point podcast, but this desire to go after her for the way she's grieving her husband, that's the most preposterous thing I've seen in a very long time, and I've seen a lot of crazy stuff in politics.
Amen. Thank you for saying that, Mr. Vice President. So I think this segues very well into our next question here. You are a practicing Catholic. You're, despite your language, you're attempting to be a faithful Catholic.
That's right.
I think it was well placed, if I may say. I'm sure you've seen that the Vatican and the Pope and the President have been in the news lately. So as a Catholic, what does it feel like to be, in the middle of that?
I thought it was going to be an easy question. This is kind of a tough question here.
Nope, no easy ones.
So here's the thing about this. So first of all, you will sometimes hear people say, well, the Vatican, the church, whether it's the Protestant church, the Catholic church, they should preach the gospel, they should ignore public policy. I actually don't agree with that. I actually think that it's a good thing when Christian leaders, whether they're Catholic or Protestant, part of preaching the gospel is talking about how the gospel applies to the issues of the day. So I've never been one of these people who say that you should never have, Christian leadership not talking about politics, or frankly, political leaders not talking about their Christian faith. But I do think that we have to remember that, each of us has our own role. I'm the Vice President of the United States. The fundamental way I understand my role is that I'm trying to take the lessons, the moral truths that are rooted in Christianity, and I'm trying to apply them to a whole host of complicated real-world scenarios. Thank you. So my job is to apply moral truth to try to do the best thing for the American people. That's my job, and that's the President of the United States' job, and of course, he's the person who leads our administration. The Pope's job is to preach the gospel, okay? And again, I think that sometimes in the context, it doesn't bother me, even when I disagree with him. And I have a lot of respect for the Pope. I like him. I admire him. I've gotten to know him a little bit. It doesn't bother me when he speaks on issues of the day, frankly, even when I disagree with how he's applying a particular principle. So the most obvious example is, it has frustrated me that some of the Catholic clergy have attacked mercilessly the Trump administration on immigration. It is a constant idea that somehow everything that the Trump administration does when it comes to securing our borders is inhumane. And my constant response to that is, how is it humane to allow drug traffickers and sex traffickers to bring little kids across the southern border?
Amen.
How is that humane? But again, I'd almost rather have the conversation. So I kind of like, even when there's disagreement, I like it when the Pope comments on questions of immigration. I like it when the Pope talks about abortion. I like it when the Pope talks about matters of war and peace, because I think that at the very least, it invites a conversation. So I think some people, the reaction to this is to say, well, he shouldn't have said that. And look, there are certainly things that the Pope has said in the last few months that I disagree with. Let me just take one very concrete example related to this conflict in Iran. So the Pope said something where he said, and I'm gonna try to remember the exact quote, but he said that God is never on the side of those who wield the sword. God is never on the side of those who wield the sword. I'm pretty sure that he said that exact statement. Now, on the one hand, again, I like that the Pope is an advocate for peace. I think that's certainly one of his roles. On the other hand, how can you say that God is never on the side of those who wield the sword? Was God on the side of the Americans who liberated France from the Nazis? Was God on the side of the Americans who liberated Holocaust camps and liberated those innocent people from, those who had survived the Holocaust? I certainly think the answer is yes, and I agree. Jesus Christ does not. I agree. Jesus Christ certainly does not support genocide. Whoever yelled that out from the dark, he certainly does not. I think that's pretty easy. I think it's a pretty easy principle. Okay, so here's a guy. Let me just say this. This is a guy. No. First of all, random dude who's shouting. Can I finish my point and then I'll respond to what you just shouted? Is that okay? Okay, great.
Can we give him 1 second to answer this?
So let me just finish this question on the Pope, and then I want to respond to what this guy said. So, number one, when the Pope says that God is never on the side of those who wield the sword, there is more than a 1,000-year tradition of just war theory. Okay? Now, we can, of course, have disagreements about whether this or that conflict is just, but I think that it's important, in the same way that it's important for the Vice President of the United States to be careful when I talk about matters of public policy. I think it's very, very important for the Pope to be careful when he talks about matters of theology. And I think that one of these issues here is that there has been, again, hey, random dude screaming, I told you I'd respond to your point. I just want to respond to this question first. But I think one of the issues here is that if you're going to opine on matters of theology, you've got to be careful. You've got to make sure it's anchored in the truth. And that's one of the things that I try to do. And it's certainly something I would expect from the clergy, whether they're Catholic or Protestant. Now, to respond to this guy here, he said, I believe he said the administration supports a genocide in Gaza. And here's my response to that. When we came in, the humanitarian situation in Gaza was an absolute catastrophe. You know who's the person who got a peace agreement in Gaza? Donald J. Trump. So if you want to complain about what happened in Gaza, so if you want, sir, to complain about what happened in Gaza, why don't you complain about Joe Biden and the last administration? We're the administration that solved that problem. And by the way, not only was our administration like the administration that solved the problem, but the president. Excuse me, sir. Right now, you see more humanitarian aid coming into Gaza than it has any time in the past 5 years, because we have taken that situation seriously. And that's one of the things that I'm proud of about our administration, is whether it's there or Thailand and Cambodia, we have consistently tried as much as we can to solve these problems, not just complain about them like the guy who just ran away angry.
You know, JD, I'll never forget your speech at Charlie's memorial, and you talked about how your faith in the wake of Charlie's assassination has become so central to you. You talk about it more, and now you're even writing a book about it.
Sure.
Tell us about it.
Yeah,
what's it called? It's called the Wake.
Well, it's called Communion, and you know, I think the subtitle is Finding My Way Back to Faith.
Yes.
And you know, here's why I wanted to write this book, Andrew, because you know, I think that like a lot of you, there was a point in my life. I mean, you're probably this is probably a much more Christian audience than maybe I was when I was a 22-year-old college student. I just got out of the Marine Corps, and I realized that I was sort of winning this game of life in one sense, and I was losing it in the way that mattered. And, you know, I was raised in a Christian household. I was raised in a very sort of Pentecostal family. You know, our church had really good music and amazing people. And one of the things I love about evangelical culture in the United States of America is just how welcoming it is of everybody, right? And you know that. You're an evangelical Christian. And so the thing is, I hadn't been properly formed in my faith. And so I got to the Marine Corps, and by the time I left the Marine Corps and it was starting college, I called myself an atheist. And I kind of went through this period of being an angry atheist, and then I realized when I got to a point where I thought to myself, what actually matters in life? It's not getting into a law school, which I had done. It's not making a lot of money. It's not credentials. It's not good jobs. It's being a good person. It's, you know, I'd fallen in love with this, thank you. I'd fallen in love with a girl, and that girl eventually became my wife and the mother to our now 4 children. And I remember thinking to myself, like, she doesn't care whether I make a certain amount of money. She wants me to be a good husband. She wants me to be a good father. She wants me to be a virtuous person. And I started to realize
She wants a date night.
Yes, she does want that, which is hard when you're vice president of the United States. But what I realized is that the philosophy of secular liberalism, it was achieve, achieve, achieve. Get as many credentials, make as much money as possible, and that left me feeling empty. And meanwhile, it was this faith that I discarded as a kid, which actually provided a real sense of meaning and purpose. And then I talked to a priest, and this priest was like, you know what? If you think that the Christian faith is right about all these moral questions, maybe it's right because there's a witness element to it. Like maybe the fact that it's right about morality and about virtue and about sin, maybe that means it's also right about the fact that Jesus Christ was the Son of God. Maybe it's also right that Jesus Christ died and rose from the dead on the third day. Like maybe these things that appeal to you about the Christian faith come from the deeper truth of the Christian faith. And that kind of got me down a pathway of where eventually I was baptized and became a very devout Christian. And at this point, amen. Thank you.
Amen.
But, you know, I thought, first of all, a lot of people have asked me about that journey. And I thought, what better way than to sit down and actually force myself to write it out? I actually started writing the book back in 2017, right after Usha had our first baby, my son Ewan, who's now 8 years old. And so I've been kind of writing it off and on since then. And, you know, a little bit Charlie's death, a little bit just being in the public eye, but mostly just I've been at this thing for 10 years, and I was like, it's finally time to get it out there. And so I put the finishing touches on it, submitted to the publisher a couple of months ago, and it's coming out in June. So buy the book, Communion.
Love that. Not that that wasn't also really riveting, but we're getting to the part of the interview that I'm really excited about. You are working on fraud. You're the fraud czar.
Yes.
How many bad guys? Yes, we could. How many bad guys are we gonna get? I mean, that's the way there's a really nice framing of this question that I worked on. No. I want to know what's the progress? Tell us about it.
Well, we've already gotten a lot of bad guys, and this is, you know, one of the things I'm very proud about is that, you know, people don't just want talk; they want action. They want us to actually go and arrest the people who committed fraud, and that's happening. We're starting to do that. Good. That's a good thing, and a lot more is going to be happening in the future. But actually, you know who's been amazing on this is Dr. Oz, Mehmet Oz, who runs the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, because so much of the fraud in our system is people who are defrauding Medicare and Medicaid. Let me just give you a couple of examples. So we have in South Florida, we have entire companies that sell medical devices. They sell prosthetic knees, and they sell prosthetic hips. And you know that they've received hundreds of millions, some of them billions of dollars in government funds, and they've never shipped a single product. They're just set up by fraudsters, and there's so many of them, and many of them haven't. There are like over 100 of these companies that haven't shipped a single product. Okay, I'll give you another example of fraud. So this ridiculous situation with Somali fraudsters in Minneapolis, in the Minneapolis area. So you have a program that exists to help autistic children get the resources they need, to help their parents, you know, find them a ride to school, or if they need after-school support, to make sure their parents have what they need. And that program has been defrauded by Somali fraudsters who will go in, who will say that we have 3 kids, every single one of them is autistic, there's no verification from the state of Minnesota, so that family will receive tens of thousands of dollars from the taxpayer. And then the autistic children in Minneapolis who actually do need those services, the money's not there anymore because it's been taken away by fraudsters. We've completely stopped the funding to that program, and we basically told the state of Minnesota, you don't get any more of our money unless you verify that you're taking fraud seriously. So we just turned it off. But you know, but what Dr. Oz, working with some of the people in our Department of Justice, found is that in Southern California, you had all these people who were engaged in massive fraud against the Medicare system. You had just tons and tons of people getting rich off fraud. And so we had our weekly fraud check-in call 2 weeks ago, and Dr. Oz called in, but he's like, hey, I gotta go because I'm about to hop on the bus and we're gonna go arrest a bunch of fraudsters in Los Angeles. I was like, that's exactly what I want you to do. By all means, get off the phone. So we're doing a lot of that stuff. And I think one of the biggest things, and the most important things we're doing on this, Andrew, is that there was sort of in the Biden administration, probably intentionally, but regardless, this attitude of if you're committing fraud of under $1 million, you're committing fraud of under $1.5 million, we're just going to look the other way. And the approach that we've taken in the last couple of months is no amount of fraud is too big or too small. If you're defrauding the taxpayer, you ought to go to prison, and anybody who's helping you ought to go to prison too.
That's great. I mean, I think this is one of the absolute slam dunk issues. How many of you guys out in this audience care about American taxpayers getting ripped off? Right? This is like a 90-10, 99-1 issue.
The guy who was shouting at us earlier, he doesn't care at all about people getting ripped off by fraud.
But, you know, I think it underscores a bigger problem, right? Because there's a lot of young people in this room, okay? A lot of you had some very formative years ripped off as well during COVID. You didn't get to do prom. Absolutely. You didn't get graduation. There were so many things taken from you. And, you know, you entered into the college years maybe with a really anemic workforce environment, inflation, historic, life's expensive. What do you tell young people right now that even right now they're wondering, what's the future that I can get? What's the career I can get? Can I afford to have a family, kids, buy a home? What's your message to them right now that have big questions ahead of their future?
I think my message to young people who are wondering whether they can afford a family, whether they can afford a home, whether they can afford, kids and the American dream is you guys have every right to demand more of your elected leadership. And my job is to make it as possible for the answer to that question to be yes. And fundamentally, the question you should ask your politicians is exactly that. Are you pursuing policies that make it easier for me to afford a house, easier for me to get a good job, easier for me to get a good education, and easier for me to raise my family in safety and security and comfort? That is the fundamental issue. And the thing that bothered me so much about the last administration, there are all these unique policies that I could sort of point to that were disastrous, and a lot of them were absolutely terrible. But so much of it goes back to housing and immigration and the connection between the two. Under the 4 years that Joe Biden was president, housing literally doubled in value. Meaning, if you're a young person trying to buy a house, it costs twice as much as it did before. And you layer on top of that higher interest rates. That's just in 4 years. Nobody can afford that kind of inflation in the housing market. And one of the biggest drivers of it is the fact that we let in tens of millions of illegal aliens. People who shouldn't have been here, who are taking homes that ought by right go to you and your generation. And so what have we done in the Trump administration? We've shut the border. We've kicked a lot of those people who have come into the United States. We've kicked them out of our country. And importantly, we've actually instituted a ban on institutional investors buying up American homes. Because I don't want private equity firms, many of them backed by foreign money, to buy American homes. I want you guys to be able to buy American homes. And I will say, and I say this not to brag because I think you guys should be impatient. When a politician comes to you and tells you, I've done all these things, you should be asking, good, now go and do more. That's how I think of my job. I don't wake up and say, oh, we did something really good last week. I think to myself, we did something good last week, now let's go do more of it, or let's go do something different. Because maybe the statistic that I'm proudest of in the entire Trump administration is that over the last 8 months, rents and home prices have come down. Not stayed the same, they have come down. And what I think of as our ultimate ambition is that after another few years of this administration, of stopping private equity barons from buying up homes, from kicking out more illegal immigrants, from securing the border, what we're going to see is housing that is much more affordable, and then we're going to keep on building on it year after year after year, because the American dream should not be sold to the highest foreign bidder. It belongs to you.
Yeah.